course, a lot is made of people, let's talk about Muslims specifically, who were told don't feel a sense of belonging, and it's because they don't feel that sense of loyalty that we're seeing this rise in extremism, intolerance, etc. That link is very much made often. Despite the fact survey after survey shows that British Muslims actually show a higher sense of loyalty despite all of this stuff going on. How would you explain these contradictory findings?
Well, I don't think they're contradictory in a way. I think actually they're very complementary. I think Muslims, the nature of our religion, it's a very social religion. It's built upon building society. And so Muslims tend to, if we can, find a way to make society cohere for us and for other people. I mean, I don't mean to say, we're awfully good do-gooders, we go out and volunteer necessarily, but we try and make sure the family's strong, we try and treat our neighbours well. We try and build sound society. And when you do that, you feel that you belong in it because it feels safe and nice. But of course, we are in a situation where, we have come from countries that are not familiar with a lot of, white Britons, English and what have you. And so therefore we have to, we are having to adjust, explain ourselves a lot. We are having to, make more effort to put down roots. And I don't think they're contradictory. They're just different bits of the experience of being a Muslim in a new situation.
Often people who don't feel they belong in one sense get a sense of belonging in another sense, whether it's gangs or indeed more extreme cult type groups.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, because this is why I think that national belonging is very important, because in a modern democracy, no one is going to just be Muslim. I mean, in the olden days, there were lumps of countries that were just Muslim, and you could just be a Muslim. But now, in today's Britain, we are inevitably going to mix, and for our benefit, with Christians, Jews, people who have no faith, people that might even be Zoroastrian, Rastafarian, you name it, you can find it. So we have to be able to both feel confident of our identities and our faith, but also be open to the wisdom of other people. And that will mean that we belong.
Well, sitting here, it all seems so clear and obvious. And yet the very things we're saying, this melting pot, this experience of lots of different faiths, even the changing economic situation, which means we need to be more flexible and adaptable, these are also the very reasons why we're seeing more xenophobia and more intolerance. I don't think it's accidental we're seeing the rise in the EDL, for example.
I mean, I think what sometimes happens, particularly at times of recession, and people are not getting the answers that they want to get from politicians, or they don't feel that their voice is heard, very often you get people moving to the extremes, because it's very often people who we perceive as being on the extreme who are giving people the narrative, what they want to actually hear. But the reality is they very often are not giving people the answers that they actually want to hear. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that we're not going to have those swings. But I feel that people who are in power really do need to be putting their heads together to sort this out. And that's what I can't feel at the moment. I can't feel this collaborative, collegiate sense of people talking, and the right people. Certain people are having dialogue. There are certain people out there.
So who would you say are having the dialogue who perhaps shouldn't be, and who do you think should be having that dialogue?
I think the people who are having the dialogue at the moment seem to be very much politicians, and they should be. Some people who keep standing up and saying they are the voice of the community or communities, and I sometimes wonder if those people have actually been into those communities for a very long time. And I think it's not so much to displace them. What we need to be doing is to be adding to those voices. For example, I think a powerful thing, particularly after the disturbances this summer in some of our cities, we need to be talking to young people. And I don't see enough young people kind of engaging. And particularly with this discussion, we're talking about identity. We can't talk about identity without including the next generation. So I think there's a lot of dialogue that needs to be going on, but somebody needs to decide who we need to have that dialogue with.
But do you think sometimes even this discussion of identity is a convenient displacement for issues around interests and inequalities, full stop? It's almost easier to make this an ethnic issue, and we saw an extreme example of that, in my opinion, with Starkey's comments kind of making this just a black issue about identity and blaming it all on rap and some kind of foreign culture, when it was actually very much a British phenomenon, and some would say it's a British capitalist phenomenon.
And that was me and Starkey. It was me on Newsnight with David Starkey. And
so can I just
yeah,
cut
sure.
in there, just to pick up on your last point about youth voices and groups that need to get to grips with it. I mean, one area that absolutely has not got to grips with it at all is the education system. And that's a classic area where you compulsorily put all our young people in a system, and yet it's not preparing them for this multi-faith, multicultural society. It's not preparing them to take the flexible approach to other peoples. It's actually preparing people to go to the extremes by being in certain ways very rigid and inflexible. And I think we do need to build the types of curricular materials that help build bridges between cultures, that help to show people the overlapping ways that, to take one example, Britain has related to the Islamic world. That's not explored in schools.
So for you, it's what's not included is as problematic as perhaps...
Exactly.
What
I'm not sure that I would agree with that, because I go into lots of schools as an education consultant. I see some amazing work being done in schools. And in some schools, I don't see it as much. And I agree with you to some extent. We got so obsessed with particular things with the curriculum, we weren't actually looking at the holistic education we should be teaching our children. But what I don't want to see is this movement back to what people used to call the saris and samosas and still pans routine. Dollops of bits of culture, because I was one of those kids, really. And so what you would get is, for example, if you've got an ethnic group that's underachieving, and for years in our schools, black boys of particular ethnic groups have been underachieving, and there's been too much of, let's just give them a bit of their culture. I've been there, it doesn't work. Actually, a parent sends their child to school to get an education, to ensure that their learning is moving on. And what we need to be doing is using what you're talking about, but using it as a learning tool in school at the same time. We can be doing two things at once. But I agree, but there is some amazing practice in schools.
There is. And I would agree with that, and that basic point.
So don't throw out the baby with
don't throw the baby with the bathwater, but also, that sort of samosa saris, what was the third one? Steel pans approach. I mean, that still goes on, which is that you do get this great practice, this great multicultural meeting of mind stuff, but actually that's a sort of fringe issue. It's not at the heart of what's taught in the curriculum, which, if you look at history, which is my subject, for example, excessively privileges a sort of white British story of Britain. I mean, obviously that's an important part of the story of Britain, but for history to be relevant to Britain's today, it must include the black story, but not just slavery, the positive black story. It must include the Muslim story, but not just Muslims and 9/11, but the contribution of Muslims to science and to British culture.
So it's that positivity, the idea that we've all built on each other.
My story is almost like that. When I was 17, I was a history buff. I loved history. There was no one like my history teacher as far as I was concerned. And I walked into our school library and I saw a book and it had a black man on the front. And the kind of school I went to, it was a Catholic girls' school. You didn't see black people in books, you didn't see black posters on the wall with people. And I picked this book up and it was telling me about this revolution, this slave revolt that happened at the same time as the American Revolution, the French Revolution. I thought, hang on a minute, I've learned about the French Revolution, the American Revolution. Why has no one in this school taught me about this slave revolution which actually happened?
It's exactly the kind of point.
Absolutely, and it made me then go, and I did an African history degree at the School of Oriental and African Studies. But really, I think what we're saying is children shouldn't have to leave it until they're ready to go to university. There should be those types of learning already in school, and they are in some schools.
And that would perhaps make it more difficult for extremists of whatever bent to try and separate people.
I think it just widens the mind. I was talking to some young people. I went into a prison this week. I go and do quite a number of visits in prisons, and I went to a youth offenders institute, a YOI, and I was telling the young boys, go out there, broaden your mind, travel, see the world, because I started travelling when I was 20 and I haven't stopped. And the world just broadens your mind. And I think particularly in a place like, say, London, a place like Birmingham, we've got all those people from around the world here. We should use those opportunities to engage with each other.
Talking about broadening minds and history, if I can bring you back to that infamous or famous Starkey comment. Here's a man who apparently does know his history. He's not somebody who's from an underprivileged background who didn't know better and has been misled by somebody. What would you put that down to, that kind of outburst?
His background's very interesting because he actually comes from, I think, a quite poor white working class background. I think on the one hand, David Starkey is a public outrager. That's one of the roles that he does, is outrage. And I think he made the mistake of coming on public television, talking about something with no evidence base. And shame on him as a historian to not have an evidence base. And he was just putting up classic things, gangster rap, oh, it's black people. And he made himself look very, very foolish. You know, I woke up the next day to over 1,000 tweets from around the world, and people just couldn't understand what he was doing. And I think he was just putting a spotlight on him, because that's what David Starkey does.
So you just put it down to attention-seeking
I think
behaviour.
it was attention-seeking, because we've heard that story before, you see. It's not the first time people have talked, for example, oh, rap is the issue. It's not the first time, but people have talked about it in the past. At least they've tried to bring some evidence to the debate, other than just a text message and talking about their time on Jamie Oliver's Dream School. But he didn't seem to do that. And I think what upset me the most was this was a moment, a time when we should be putting our heads together. We shouldn't be getting angry. Let's calm down. Let's find some collective solutions, rather than let's have someone again being angry, pointing the finger, blame, blame, blame. Let's stop the blame. Let's calm down, and let's kind of find solutions to move forward together.
Well, on that very positive and collaborative note, our time has run out this week, but do join us at the same time next week. And don't forget, you can watch us again as the programme is repeated. Also, you can catch us on YouTube, and do tweet us as well. Join us same time next week. Thank you to our guests.